When Griffin landed in Australia, he immediately started on his quest. He presently made up his mind to two things of preeminent importance. First, the ultimate, since it was the correct, location of the federal capital. Second, the location of the eastern port of Australia, as New York is the eastern port of the United States. Like New York, Port Stephens has sea-level entrance to the interior of the continent. It is in close contact with vital mineral supplies, and Newcastle is an already established industrial centre nearby. He designed the city. It was surveyed, the allotments staked out, and the whole was sold from the plan in the Sydney Real Estate Office. This meant contour surveys were made, in the course of which he became personally acquainted with Aboriginals. Port Stephens, as the natural eastern continental seaport of Australia, can stand as the keystone for metropolitan, urban, suburban and rural development or Australia for some time to come, as a pattern. In his town planning work, Griffin would never allow the surveyors to follow the custom of putting the district to the fire, nor cutting swathes through the trees, no matter what their majesty. He made this requirement of the men surveying Port Stephens. Then he was up there, he made the acquaintance of King Billy, an Aboriginal who worked with the surveyors. Finding Griffin sympathetic, King Billy talked freely with him and gave him much interesting information about the native plants. Through him, Griffin learned how precise was their knowledge, for King Billy could identify at a distance even a dead tree. The Aboriginals were interested, as Griffin was, in the character of the form rather than in the minute distinctions which the botanists as a whole centre on, which in fact gives them the ability to attach names but does not give them real knowledge of the plants they are listing. Contact with the ancient peoples should awaken us to the fact that they use a different kind of thinking from ourselves, an experience which, if we were open-minded, would lead us on to the investigating and mastering of that kind of thinking, and to take as much pains as we have taken in the mastery of rational thinking, in these modern times. Let us face the future of Port Stephens, and look at the spectacle of a city completely beautiful, correct in its location, in its design, and in its solution of its various types of buildings. There is no reason why the earliest buildings, as well as the later ones, should not be correct and correctly placed, and all beautiful, for as we have seen in our preceding studies, beauty is not an expense, but calls simply for the expenditure of mind and spirit, which are not depleted by use, but the contrary. In other words, it calls for the use of human faculties, thinking, feeling and will, doing. To realize the deadly effect of urban life, all of it really a slum life, we shall begin by sketching bits of life in the paradise, which is nature. And swing on to recounting, at least one man's effort, to show that it is not inevitable, nor necessary, to impose on modern children the restrictions, the filth, the noise and monotony, the prison life in fact, which characterizes our modern urban civilization, bringing a conflict and war to adult life. Nature's working. Land planning, or site arrangement, is therefore concerned in understanding the features and processes of the earth itself. The relationships of the configuration, the vegetation, the rocks, the soils, the waters, and the very winds. And conservation, to the maximum, of their effectiveness, and their irreplaceable perfection, and their beauty. The purpose of town planning is to get rid of dirt and noise. To do so, restores health and sanity, which calls for a close contact with nature. The social expression. There are sociological corollaries, particularly to domestic land planning, which have been evidenced, for 10 years, even in this small nucleus of a community, the Castelkrug. The greatest social defect of modern metropolitan life is in the obliteration of the individual into an unorganized mass. Immediately surrounding Castelkrug are no less than 3,000 inhabitants in a square mile, in which there is neither church, nor hall, school, nor club, nor lodge, nor social consciousness of any sort. Yet, in a contrast, Here, within this group of but a score or more homes, there have been continuously living a literary, sociological, dramatic, philosophic, musical, folk dancing, or ballet, as well as social groups, tennis and golf clubs, and kindergartens, all independently recruited, and carried on independently, giving scope to individual expression and activity, other than as mere witness. Any who are in doubt, can study the results already obtained, in comparison with the current practice on all grounds, an economic, social, or aesthetic, to find the justification for the expectation. Open spaces are reserved for all time. The interior parks, giving safe play space for the little ones still calling for care, yet, allowing them the intercourse with other children, so useful for development. Park paths connect these reserves, so that delightful walks will be possible, even after occupation is complete. Foreshores, to the extent of some 4 or 5 miles, are being dedicated to the public. With that, the community could regain those previously subdivided, and sold to the water's edge. You see, that politicians, really, whether they are members of parliament, or aldermen in councils, have no real power, and are soon taught that. The permanent officials, the civil servants, who are there always, while the politicians are transients, are all powerful, and nobody can touch their power. And they care not a hang, what anybody thinks, or says, or does. Regulations preclude individual thought, or judgment, on the part of the administrators, as well as all others, and excuse the retention of untrained, inexperienced officers, where the highest kind of foresight, insight, and courage are needed, to protect the right of the future. The laws of planning can be derived only from all the finished plans, and are always being varied, as fresh plans are always being created. My objectives for New South Wales town planning legislation, especially empowering private owner groups to become responsible town planning authorities, independent of, and as a protection against, demoralising municipal councils. That idea is, that it is absurd for Australians to keep following in the gouty footsteps of old John Bull, or to ape Uncle Sam. They must think out a new civilization, and begin to draw up the ground plan of the new institutions. The idea may be summed up in a phrase. Life is a fine art.